Hello everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast Synopsis as part of the Cortex Narrate and Cortex Narrate series. This audio podcast is part of a Cyclone Cascade. This audio podcast as part of a Coachella Blitz. This is an audio podcast as part of a Storm Robotics production. In this audio podcast series, there'll be a look at sort of peer review works in regarding relating to the issues around chronic kidney disease, CKD terminologies, and as part of this synopsis, looking at aspects in regard to the peer reviewed and sort of presented works, published works, the presented works from 2016 at the International Pediatric Nephrology Association, or IPNA in 2016, and also sort of published works in 2016 as well, and where this synopsis provides a sort of a basis as a basis as part of the full series in this audio podcast series. So research informs that a new creatinine equation, or biomarker-based equation, could potentially be compared with the use of Cystatin C-based equation. However, findings require further validation in and across groups of patients. The creatinine equation and creatinine biomarker has been a biomarker utilized in as part of diagnosis retrospectively for many decades for patients who are suspect or high risk for chronic kidney disease and varying kidney diseases. However, there are other biomarkers. For example, Cystatin C, and where, for example, creatinine has come. Creatinine as a biomarker, and a creatinine in the use of a specific calculation, a calculation on equation, has also sort of in more recent years has come under scrutiny, owing to where, for example, those who are suspect or high risk for renal insufficiency or kidney insufficiency, creatinine has come under scrutiny, owing to how the biomarker or the calculation can for example at epidemiological level can cause inconsistencies. It can cause inconsistency, thus inconsistencies in some aspects, where, for example, those who are suspect or higher risk for renal insufficiency are those in amongst ethnic for example, in ethnic minority groups. So of Alabama in the University of Alabama at Birmingham in the United States, had noted that although a race-free creatinine-based equation for estimated glomerular filtration rate (eGFR) may attenuate racial differences in access to for example, renal transplantation, it is uncertain what consequences there may be from widespread utilization of this formula. And so, for example, whilst those from ethnicities such as black origin, for example, may be affected by the utilization of the formula, they are also the smallest population for example on forms of renal replacement or kidney replacement therapies, and also for referral for transplantation, around for transplantation. However, more ethnic minorities, again, not just blacks, will be and are affected, can be effective or are affected at high estimated glomerular filtration rate thresholds, including in around renal transplantation, donor candidacy, and post-transplantation follow-up. There is a corresponding increase in prevalence of CKD amongst individuals in the general population who identify as from black origin, and may be excluded from the donor pool, thus limiting access to live transplant donation in a population at disadvantage. So also new eGFR estimated glomerular filtration rate equations that incorporate creatinine and cystatin C, but omit race, are more accurate and tend to have led to smaller differences in renal function between black participants, between those from black backgrounds and participants and non-black backgrounds and participants than, for example, new equations or calculations where race with either creatinine or cystatin C biomarkers alone are implemented from a laboratory medicine and pathology perspective. In context to the above, whilst there have been various discussions and perspectives surrounding the issues, for example, in and around Black Lives Matter, the healthcare aspects have never really been focused and or articulated, owing to sort of the activist sort of approaches. Wherever activism is pronounced, understanding surrounding healthcare aspects are rarely articulated, and often misinformed and misinterpreted. This audio podcast series will delve into works looking at sort of the varying severities in around chronic kidney disease, and the varying severities in around chronic kidney disease and CKD, but also looking at specifically in around the reference ranges, or the laboratory reference ranges, in around the estimated glomerular filtration rate, as a basis as part of diagnoses, but also where in this audio podcast series and looking at sort of published works from 2016 where the collaborative works had delved into looking at and questioning whether, for example, there should be an additional severity and CKD stage, in context of where community nephrology would link better in context of laboratory medicine, i.e. where collaborative works had looked at, for example, looked at omitting, for example, CKD stage 3A and 3B, and replacing CKD, adding a sixth severity in around CKD, where in amongst particular and specific populations, CKD 6 stage would potentially make more sense. The works that have been published and published and sort of presented from 2016, and part of this, and will form part of this audio podcast series, aligns to part of the synopses, looking at sort of the eGFR calculations and equations in context of looking at suspect and high risk patients in context of diagnoses, but also where the series looks at an additional CKD severity stage in context of where, for example, in populations such as minority populations, for example, where there's pediatrics and young people, for example, where the series will look into a basis in around and question, for example, again, whether there should be a sixth severity, CKD stage, or CKD stage 6, in context of aligning, again, community nephrology and aligned to nephrology, laboratory medicine and pathology as well, and again looking at sort of reflecting on the eGFR calculations in context of population nephrology as well. That draws this audio podcast synopsis to a close. This is an audio podcast, the synopsis, as part of the Cortex Narrate, and the Cortex Narrate series, an audio podcast as part of the Cyclone Cascade, an audio podcast as part of a Coachella Blitz, an audio podcast as part of a Storm Robotics production.